So Vladimir Putin saying he believes in Russia's victory against Ukraine in his New Year's address as the Kremlin launches over 200 drones on Ukraine, killing at least 2. Here to discuss is retired four-star general, Fox News senior strategic analyst, chairman of the Institute of Study of War, General Jack Keane. General, great to see you. Your thoughts about Vladimir Putin promising again total victory. What's the reality?
Well, here, just look at the facts. You know, we're 4 years into the war, and he's got 20% of the territory. In 22, he had 25% of the territory. And he's been able to increase in the last 2 years just 1%. That we're at now World War II standards in terms of time of war. The last major city he took was in 22. That was Mariupol. We all remember the name of it. And he's taking much smaller towns at an incredible pace. It's a foot pace. No more mechanized tank attacks, because if they show a tank or they show infantry fighting vehicles, Ukrainians kill it. And so it's the infantry moving at night at a foot pace. He's not capable of taking Ukraine if the United States and Europeans continue to support the Ukrainians. That is a fact. And that's where we are. He knows that, and his economy is crunching in on him. But look what he just did. As a result of the meeting with President Zelensky and President Trump and the unification that they showed there, which I thought was quite considerable, given the 5 to 6 weeks of negotiations with the United States and Ukrainians and the Russians, and the progress being made, particularly with coming to an agreed position in the United States and Ukrainians, Putin saw that. And in desperation, he talks to the president about Ukraine attacking his residence, and he's shutting down negotiations. That is a bold-faced lie. The Institute for Study of War knew it for a fact within the first 24 hours. Why? No social media in the neighborhood blowing up on the social media sites like they always do when there's a major drone attack, supposedly 91 drones. No air defense systems firing anything, no evidence of any damage, no evidence of any drones on the ground being destroyed. And now the United States government, I think, is leaking the fact that it did not happen. But he lied to the president. It was out of desperation because he resented what was taking place there. Yeah. I think we got to reevaluate what's going on with Mr. Putin and his sincerity. He is lying to us about peace negotiations and his desire for peace. And I think we got to rework our thought process and how to deal with him. And it may be time now to double down on maximum sanctions and maximum military pressure.
I mean, look, the president's given us so much leeway and said, look, we're starting fresh. I don't care whose fault it is. We're going to end this thing. And it's become abundantly clear over the last 6 months that Vladimir Putin has no interest in ending this thing, even though he's losing 31,000 soldiers a month. And I encourage everyone to read the New York Times and see some of the chronicles of the abuse the Russians are giving their own soldiers who are fighting this war. Meanwhile, here's President Zelensky about how close peace is. Listen.
20 points plan, and when I said 90%, it's true, because there are questions only with 2 points. That's why I said 90%. It's really 90%. It's very productive. Even with one question today, we've been very close, and I think we have a problem with one question. It's about territories.
It's the Donbass region that they're not going to win. And as the Institute of Study of War says, it would take 3 years minimum for them to take all of Donbass. So at one point, I think we have to start pushing more of those defensive batteries into Ukraine. I want to get to Iran, but I just want you to weigh in on what the president of Ukraine said.
Well, look, the president of Ukraine and his people definitely want peace, but they don't want it at the expense of being more vulnerable to Russia in terms of a reattack. They don't want it on terms favorable to Russia. But he has made some serious concessions here to get that peace. And President Trump wants peace. I think we've clearly identified who doesn't want peace here, and that's Putin. Yeah. And we have to accept that reality. He says one thing, but he certainly does another.
So let's talk about Iran. For 6 straight days now, there have been growing protests inside Iran. They have very little water. Their dollar, our dollar, is worth 1.4 million Iranian rials. So inflation is through the roof. and now it's spread into the rural areas. President Trump has put this on Truth Social. Check this out. If Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the U.S. will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. Then Iran warns us not to do so. What should we be doing here? And how big a deal are these protests in your mind, General?
Yeah, well, they are a big deal. I mean, the backdrop for this is when the 12-day war ended, the Iranians were really shook by that, particularly by the fact on the first shots that were fired killed all their senior military generals. I'm not talking about some of them. I'm talking about all of them. As we know, the senior nuclear scientists as well. They did not kill any of the civilian leaders. Let's make the assumption they knew where the civilian leaders were as well as they knew where the military leaders were. That rocked this regime. After the war ended, and they were weakened militarily for sure, and certainly more economically, they knew full well they were weakened politically inside of Iran as well as outside of Iran. And what did they do? They arrested 21,000 Iranians on the desperate hope that they were trying to put away in jail the informants. I think they were also trying to intimidate the population, and they feared reprisals because they're so weakened. They killed somewhere in the neighborhood, independent authorities, so our viewers understand, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 of those 21,000 they tortured and beaten inside of prison. President Trump has all this information. He knows full well what this regime is up to. 6 months later, here come the reprisals for the reasons you stated. Their life is miserable in Iran. That we estimate, independent sources, 90% of the people oppose the regime, Brian. That is absolutely staggering, and they're willing to go into the streets to risk their lives. Unlike Obama, President Trump has stood up for the Iranian people here and saying, leave them alone. Let them protest. They have legitimate concerns. Don't do harm or else. And in the back of the Iranians' minds, they know full well that they could come for them this time, the civilian leaders, with the help, obviously, of the Israelis in doing such a thing, and other options that they have available. This reminds me of Reagan, back when Les Walesa, the welder union boss, was leading a demonstration against the Soviet Union and the Russians who were controlling Poland at the time, and Reagan stood up for them. President Trump is taking a step further than that and saying, I'm going to be there for you, not just morally. So this is a significant step, I think, in the right direction, recognizing after talking to Bibi Netanyahu over the weekend, he knows full well how weakened Iran is politically, economically, and militarily. And we have leverage here, and he's willing to exercise that leverage to do what? To change their behavior. That is what is happening here.
It's historic to start 2026 because they've been a problem to the West and through the region since 1979's revolution. General Jack Keane, we'll keep a close eye on what's happening there. Thanks so much. Always great.
Yeah, great talking to you guys. Have a wonderful weekend. Happy New Year.
Same to you.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.